more questions that I could certainly ask, and more questions that we discussed to talk about, but I wanted to open it up to you all based on either what you've heard this evening, and many of the things that were talked about are things that are touched upon in roadmap. If you've looked in your brochure, you'll see that we have a policy proposal on this regional economic development approach on some of these incentives that were mentioned that will support the type of infrastructure that I believe Anita is talking about. So I'd love to open it up questions to either things that you looked at in the brochure, things that you've heard tonight, or just in general, things that are happening here in the Cape Fear region, and you want to hear the perspective from folks who have done this work at the state level, and maybe have some perspective from the past, or I don't know, did you bring your crystal balls tonight to look forward?
Don't smack me upside the head here, but I'd like to ask this group a question, and that is, how do you feel about HB2?
Bill, tear it down.
And if you think it's detrimental for the state, how can we effectively change that?
Elect better people to our legislature.
Give it a gerrymandering, you can do that.
Prioritize real topics. I mean, it may be important to some or not, but if you put it in the list of things that are important, it's at the bottom, so why waste your time and money on this? You know, not just for anybody's opinion, but it should be towards the bottom.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
I was just going to say, prioritize the things that are important. You know, it may be important to you, it may not, but it's very little on the scale in the scheme of things, so you know, it should not be at the forefront of all discussions and even going through the House representatives or anything.
You talk about HB2?
Yeah.
You wouldn't spend any time worrying about it?
No, I'm just saying it should be there in general or similar, or similar laws or discussion points. Yeah. It may be important, not just for people's opinion. It may be important to somebody, but it shouldn't be the highest priority thing that we're talking about at the moment.
Yeah.
I think that falls into the category of don't screw it up.
But it's having major economic impact. I mean, regardless of whatever you think about what capital people should use, it's having major economic impact on the state. And that's the reason for taking it seriously, not because you care about which capital you
So I should have realized this from afar and haven't spent a lot of time knocking on doors in Hollywood. I guess I figured there was a concern about our current incentive effort for film making.
Those people moved away. They're gone. 50% of those guys are gone.
Well, I understand that they have to go elsewhere to work.
Yeah.
But what I was surprised to learn was that the thing that's really hurting as much as anything is HB2. And nobody in Hollywood wants to talk to us because of HB2.
But I think it's as Lena was saying, it's a bigger issue than just film at this point.
Yeah.
I think the film is largely gone and not going to come back.
Right.
But within the context of my industry, all of the negative, all of the press talking about North Carolina and what we're concerned about has had a very large impact on our ability to recruit top talent. We don't even have, when I got here, we had more than 100 applicants, good applicants, for every position we were searching for.
Right.
Now we're at like 10. And that's a huge change. And part of it is, a large part of it is HB2, but that's only an example of the national discussion about North Carolina and the perception, why would I move to North Carolina?
Yeah, I mean, we've lost faculty at UNCW who have quit their tenured positions and gone to better positions at other universities because of HB2.
Because of HB2.
And the general attitude of the legislature about personal freedoms.
Talking to leaders at the Wilson Center, at Cape Fear Community College, or even at UNCW, they're having trouble booking the right kinds of shows because it's not happening there.
Yeah.
Or if they do, the first thing that Garrison Keeler did was do a whole comedy routine about the bathroom routine. I mean, that's what they're all doing there as a little way of protesting.
Yeah.
But I do agree that as a social issue, it's not the biggest thing out there. It's how it's impacting, the economy, and I'm for repealing it. But I think if you want to get to what I consider for the regional areas, some of the major economic issues that I see. And I've only been here 17 years, so I'm not a native. But so many different ways. And locally, what I've seen is, let's make money any way we can, and the best way to do it, because we're close to communities, cut down everything in sight and build ugly structures to accommodate lots and lots of people, because the growth is coming. Is that really what coastal communities should do? Now, globally, as well as nationally, 50% or more of the population is all within 50 miles of the coastline. That's the demographic moves. That's happening everywhere, and we're in that belt. But I don't know that that needs to be encouraged. I think there have to be, I talked to a former mayor for Wilmington, and where they were just, you know, our sewage, we have sewage spills all over the place because nobody's putting money into bigger sewage pipes for all these neighborhoods coming everywhere. Well, you can't pass it on to the developers because then they can't make as much of a profit. So they're going to have to raise the prices of the homes more. And so, you know, so there's a lot of this confusion about let's just, economic development is good, it's what we have to do, we have to make money any way we can. And developers are cleaning up, and the environment is going downhill. You talked about the environment first. Pig farms and turkey farms and hog lagoons, and so that was something that was brought to coastal North Carolina in the 90s as a way to, what are we going to do for all these poor rural people who nobody wants to have tobacco anymore? So let's put, you know, these cruel animal farms and slaughterhouses everywhere and hire undocumented workers who are all going to go away now. And so, you know, there's been, I think, a lot of very poor, non-forward-thinking policies. Meanwhile, North Carolina used to be one of the top in the country for renewable energy development, solar energy, and all of this. And our legislature has disincentivized all of that. Duke Progress Energy is disincentivized, or Duke Energy Progress is disincentivizing all of that. So there are ways to put a lot of people to work and make a lot of it in renewable energy. That is a need of the future. You could put more people to work in solar panels and wind farms and things like that than you can, you know, picking crops or killing pigs.
Well, I guess that sort of begs the question. How would this group?
I want to make sure that, yeah, she's been trying to say something.
Oh, so I kind of want to switch gears a little bit and turn it to Anita, because I went to the Emerging Issues Institute for 2 years in a row, and the last year we brought in Buyback, who is a technology futurist, and he really thinks, and he's a progressive thought leader. If you haven't followed him on Twitter, you might want to think about it. But one thing that I've seen in just the 3 years that I've been here in Wilmington is that we have a huge technology skills gap, and that Emerging Institute issue was the future of the workforce in North Carolina, and it was that, you know, we're going to, as automation changes, everything's going to move to technology-focused jobs. Now, there is job growth creation in Wilmington with Live Oak Bank and with Encino. However, if you look at those jobs, they are not able to attract local talent because the roles that they're looking for are software developers or software engineers, and they're having to really aggressively recruit from outside the area. Meanwhile, all the students who are graduating with computer science degrees aren't being offered competitive salaries and are moving to Durham and Raleigh because of the people hiring entry-level workers aren't willing to pay competitive entry-level salaries of what those students would make in Raleigh or Durham with the cost of living. And what's really interesting is that if you look at rental prices here, rent is the same in here as it is in Raleigh, Durham. For a $20,000 pay differential for a freshly graduating college student that I measure, it's just not justifiable. And so here you just have this huge brain drain going on, and it's also, as you have aging populations, there should be some sort of regional development effort where people can go get job retraining and job rehiring. And I don't really see that. I kind of want to know what the North Carolina overall vision and then like what the regional vision is for acknowledging and working on this technology skill gap.
I can't speak to the regional vision, but I'd love to have other people in the audience respond to it. I can't speak to the North Carolina vision, there is none. Literally, there is none. So, two implications of what you've said that I think resonate across the state. The first is, North Carolina has always been so good at importing its talent. Really good. in large part how we got from being the sleepy Rip Van Winkle state of the 1950s to the state we became. We imported people. And if you look even at last year's immigrants to North Carolina, in every single county, the people who moved to the county came with higher education than the people who had resided in the county, in every county in North Carolina. That's the reality of our world. What's really challenging about this, twofold. First, to hear that now we're actually challenged to recruit the best and brightest to North Carolina, which may force us to ask the question, so what do we do with our homegrown talent? And how do we ensure that our homegrown talent is prepared for the best jobs that we have to offer? We haven't really struggled with that, and it's part of why I said the number one thing that I think the state could do for regions in North Carolina is better integrate workforce development, meaning talent development, with the economic development strategy. North Carolina's information system about who it needs with what skills and what regions of the state is actually worse than Mississippi's. Now you need to understand, I grew up in Louisiana. Saying something is worse than Mississippi was like, you pray for that in Louisiana. Oh God, how can that be in a state with the kind of data analytics capabilities that we have? If I were queen for the day, the first thing I would do is get to work on making sure that in Wilmington you can say, we project in the next 5 years to meet this many people with these skills. These are the people who are coming out of UNC Wilmington or coming out of our community college. We have some sense that we are training people for the opportunities that exist and that we will be able to compensate them so they stay in place. The reality is, people-based strategies are going to become more important in the next 10 years. The way we used to think about recruiting companies, we're going to start thinking about recruiting people. It'd be really great if we could do it with some of our homegrown folks. Let's incentivize people to be in places where we need them to be. Regional strategy.
Kind of, before that came up, the one thing I'm looking up here, and maybe it's because I'm an engineering leader, but STEM education to me should be the number one thing out here. We've got voters that are getting faced with more and more technology-based decisions, and they're not making good ones. They don't understand what they're up against. We're becoming a communication, and communication is just exploding. That's where we're going. You talk about building pig farms out in rural communities. Our rural communities aren't going to recover from pig farms. They're going to recover from satellite technology centers. And Wilmington's a good mid-sized town, and we're already starting to, look at becoming a technology center. But, if you're out in the middle of nowhere, you're not connected to the roads and the highways and shipping and sending a lot of, materials and factories around, but you are in the middle of the data stream. And that's how we're going to recover. And we're not going to change this state, let alone the city overnight. We're going to do it the same way we race to the bottom. We're going to do it year after year. And if we start prioritizing STEM education and make sure everybody doesn't have to be a scientist or an engineer, but everybody needs to know what they're talking about and know when somebody walks up and says, global warming is a real thing. Well, there's a chance it's not, so we don't have to do anything. That's not good math. You respond to the probabilistic argument that a really bad thing's going to happen. If you get lucky, you'll get lucky.
So may I just offer a quick response to that? Because I couldn't agree with you. Regardless of where the job growth is going to be, and we ought to have more people coming through the pipeline. We need to have more people, and we need to have more diverse people coming through the pipeline. But more and more as I go across North Carolina, I'm afraid of what people think STEM is. Because increasingly I hear people talking about STEM as though it's a collection of purely technical skills. It isn't about the discernment that you're mentioning. It isn't about critical thinking. It isn't about problem collaboration. It's purely technical skills. And so, in some ways, it feels to me as though we're reducing our education institutions into sort of just cranked out little chips who can do very specific things. That doesn't make sense in the world in which we live. It doesn't make sense in a world in which the average person graduating from college today will probably have 9 careers. You have to have a fundamental base of learning that allows you to be adaptable or a STEM member. I know you weren't saying that, but I just felt like I just had to share that. It's a challenge.
STEM is a problem-solving skill. I've got an engineering degree and a law degree. And arguing, Sarah decides this is wonderful, and win a political argument. And there's a lot to be said for putting together a sound legal discussion or a political point or whatever. But to learn the scientific method and to apply that in day-to-day life is a problem-solving skill. And look at root cause analysis. And these aren't just being a programmer. This is learning to think like a scientist.
I'm agreeing with you, by the way. Lest you think I was arguing with you. I'm agreeing with you to that. I'm just wanting to make sure that people are thinking about the STEM in the way that you were describing it. Yeah.
I just kind of want to hear your thoughts. Some larger cities kind of moved to raising the minimum wage for their areas. What you guys think about? Because I don't see anything like that under economic growth in the pamphlet. So
there is a policy on raising the minimum wage
it's
to
there.
a
I'm new to
livable
the area.
wage.
I just moved here in November.
Yeah,
so I'm
no,
just wondering.
it's in there, but I think it's worth hearing the perspective on this. So your specific question is
Your thoughts on how it would help, especially because Wilmington being new here, it seems like it's very tourism service industry heavy, and those jobs always kind of get labeled as unskilled. They don't deserve the higher wage, but manufacturing was labeled that way a long time ago as well because it's so rote and you didn't need a college education for it. But then they unionized and those became difficult good jobs. So I was just wondering on minimum wage or unionization of the service workers and things like that in that area and how receptive the area is to that kind of thing.
Lloyd, do you want to talk about, do you have any perspective on that from the local?
Between the lines of what I said about local control was a response to what HB2 says about not setting a higher minimum wage. I think it's ridiculous for the state to tell our region that we can't do that. We think that's what's needed. We need to sit down as a region to talk about that. I'm not going to advocate one way or the other, but I think it's ridiculous for the state to say that a local municipality or county or a region can't decide that that's good for them. That's my personal feeling.
I think the jury is mixed on what the implications of raising a minimum wage might be. I also think the jury is mixed because different types of places with different types of economies can absorb different rates at the base, right? And so
We might be able to absorb it.
you may be able to absorb it and Pender County may not.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
You've got a bunch
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, and then I'll go to turn.
I'll try to make this quick. Having worked for textile industry back in the 2000s when China came into the WTO, things changed. One of the things that isn't widely recognized is that the textile industry was basically, I'll call it subsidized through tariff protection, as well as the tobacco industry was subsidized growing through agricultural subsidies, okay? And as we took away both of those industries, because those protections got taken away, there was nothing that was taken, and this goes to the question about training people. When we came in, I used to work for Unified as an executive with Unified, we had to teach people how to read and write in some of our plants. We had basic, and this is in the rural areas. And this was throughout North Carolina. People said, yes, we'll come back in and we'll give them some skill training for another job, but there was nothing to help them. You could bring in jobs, but there was nothing to help them to go to the next level. My question is, has there been anything to bring forward some off-base training because of this. I'm talking about really looking at, instead of taking the subsidies that were there, that were being used because of the terrorism, because of the agricultural subsidies. Has anyone looked at taking that money, taking it into the rural areas throughout North Carolina and using that as a subsidy to build our base?
The only thing I can think of along those lines was a real sad day when we probably recall the Polotex play.
The what?
Polotex in Kannapolis play. So 4,000 people were out of a job in 3 communities overnight. And in that case, I think that we instituted some special support for retraining and support while people got retrained and so forth. But I don't know that we have a strategy for those kind of dislocations. And those dislocations are not going to be isolated, as you know, to textiles and so forth. You talked about, and others have spoken about, the inexorable march of technology and how that means that we make more things with fewer people. And I think that's the biggest challenge we have in this country, and certainly the state, is how do we deal with the dislocation that is going to be continuing, because we know how to use robots, we know how to use technology to drive productivity, and that's going to create dislocation in the intermediate term. So I think that's something we need to get on top of.
Yes, in the back.
Okay. The map you have, to your right here, is New Hanover County, Brunswick County, some of Pender, Columbus.
Right.
And I hate to put this in such simple terms, but we're surrounded by water. And that resource has served us for over 400 years, the economy.
Right.
And too often, the conversation centers around economic development, jobs, spreading the wealth. And I think the conversation, the narrative, the paradigm has to change, where water, clean air, public health comes first when we talk about economic development, social and economic justice, job creation. There was an economic conference here, a super breakfast or a power breakfast at the convention center about 3 months ago. They brought in regional financial experts, and they talked about the challenges facing the nation, the state, and our local economy. And at the top, at the national level, it was tax reform. At the state, it was HB2. And at the local level, the biggest challenge they saw was SUP, special use permit, zoning, how we develop our land, how we use our resources, how we protect it, but we don't. And right now, when you have a public utility that spills coal ash indiscriminately, and pays high-dollar attorneys to get them off the hook, when you have a hog and poultry industry that's polluting our river, when you have 6 or 7 or 8 counties that just put a moratorium on oyster harvesting because our stormwater permits are failing, I think we need to stop and redirect our priorities. The special use permit now leads into the Unified Development Ordinance. That is going to be the major driving force over the next 25 years, and at the end of the day, we will be successful or we will be history in terms of public safety and our resources and our quality of life. The rest of it comes in second. It's in the back seat. And I think we need to refocus and change that conversation. That's from a layman's standpoint. When we talk about stakeholders, the recent SUP was predominated with builders, Chamber of Commerce, big business, attorneys, and the Coastal Federation was asked to represent minorities in transportation, small farmers, small business. All 75–80% of the special interest or real interest in this community took a back seat. I'm just very concerned about this UDO and how we participate and address that, because we could lose the golden goose very easily, and all this will be a moot point.
So is there an active dialogue about that within the community?
The meetings, the lines are out the door for people that are showing up to these meetings. Citizens are finally awake, but they weren't until this. So up until we thought the special use permit would go one way up until 2016, and then there was a pivotal moment where it switched.
The press and the community at large thinks the special use permitting process was a big success. Everybody compromised. They forgot to take account of what actually happened, and they weakened the reviewing process for new industry. How is it that Titan Cement was touted, supported with local and state government and incentive dollars for 8 years? They were going to come into our community, pollute our air, take our water resources, and be touted as an example of economic development strength. And the people in this community rose up. And I think that was a great example of getting our priorities straight. When you have special interests reclassifying heavy industries with a track record of polluting water, soil, and air, reclassifying them to lighter industry next to neighborhoods, something's wrong. And our priorities at the government level, the trust factor is very out of balance. So something's lacking. So.
It was just really frustrating for me being a young person sitting in this meeting, listening to the county commissioners talk about how our college students are going to work at a tire factory. We need to allow that, these tire rubber facilities to be here. And I was like, hold up. You need to repeal HB2 and bring back PayPal. Nobody wants to work in heavy industry. We all know that's how you get lung cancer. We've seen our parents with asbestos, with all of this. We know that. We want you to bring back PayPal. That's what we want you to do. So like, it's frustrating, it's hard to engage in these meetings and these dialogues because we're on two way different spectrums as far as the types of jobs that are being created and the jobs that we want.
And a lot of us have, when we go back to the overdevelopment, these really high density lots where they come down and cut down every tree, grass, there's nothing green there. So they plant a few little sprigs. And I mean, they're ugly. And I understand not everybody can afford a mansion. There's got to be some low-income housing, but it's got to be done in a better way. And I think it just happens. All of a sudden, you're like, whoa, what happened there? Everything's being burned and cut away, and then all of a sudden you see all these things. And those are temporary jobs. So somebody's making a lot of money off of that tract of land. Whoever sold the tract of land got, many $1 million, and then they build lots of things and they're sold. Somebody in some other place is walking away with the profits. There's a whole bunch of people, mostly, low-paid people that are getting building jobs for 6 months. And then we have this poor environmental quality, the sewers are overflooded, there's not enough water, the schools are overbuilt, there's no infrastructure for the schools. When you have this much development of this kind of housing, you're talking about younger people mostly, with lots of kids, and the schools are overcrowded, there's no space to build more schools. Development, the philosophy that people are going to come, so we have to accommodate them, as opposed to like, whoa, we need to think about this, and maybe put some gatekeepers up here. And maybe price is a way to keep it up. If you can't build new stores, then you got to raise the cost of things to generate the money for that, and then people can't afford it, and so they're not going to live here. And not move here from New York, Connecticut, or wherever.
I think that the growth challenges that you all are facing, I think it's safe to say that there are a lot of communities that are facing similar challenges.
Because of overpopulation.
I want to go right here, because there was a hand up here. Yes, you.
So, relative newcomer to the area, about 3 years now. And I want to thank you for putting on this forum, although sometimes the news is a little depressing. When you hear that the state basically doesn't seem to have a plan to address your concerns other than basically drill, baby, drill, or race to the bottom. So what?
At least there's an opportunity.
That's right. So I
efforts are underway to bring the items highlighted here forward to our elected officials to influence the direction of the city, the county, the region, and the state.
I'm gonna talk, I might ask Justin to speak. In terms of the roadmap specifically, when it was released in 2016, there were a series of efforts to go speak to elected officials, currently elected officials, to talk to them about this effort, to talk to them about the policies, to be a resource. Think North Carolina First, as we mentioned, is a non-profit, nonpartisan effort. So all of our ideas that we have sourced out across the state and actually beyond the borders of the state as well are available publicly. There are also some current efforts to engage with elected officials now, and as Justin mentioned, some small wins for some of the ideas contained in here that are reflected in the governor's budget that he just released, that are reflected in some of what's happening this legislative session. One of the ideas that is not in this pamphlet but is on the roadmap is to repeal HB2. It was added, roadmap was completed before HB2. So we added HB2 afterwards. As you all know, there have been efforts to try to repeal that. And I was actually down at the General Assembly today and was told that they're getting closer. Although I think we've heard that before, but I remain hopeful. And Justin, do you want to add anything to some of the outreach efforts?
Well, no, I think what you said is accurate. I mean, Think North Carolina First isn't an advocacy organization, since that we don't have a lobbyist or a legislature, we don't have members that are actively working on it, but that we've tried to reach out to the existing elected officials of all that, copies of it, the governor, but also that's why the importance of having meetings like this and the meetings that actually created the roadmap, where we were having business and community leaders be a part of this process, and that's why we're sharing it now, because a lot of these decisions, you know, the name of it is Roadmap 2025. It's what we think we want the state to look like in 10 years. So we know we're not going to get it all done now. There's no way, we don't have enough time or enough money, and the political environment isn't right to get all this stuff done immediately. But the hope is to sort of build the momentum, and eventually, after 10 years, and hopefully we've made a significant amount of progress. So,
thank you.
that's what it is.
Yes.
Nobody's talked yet about what appears to be some intractable poverty in this community, the racial and economic segregation of our school system. I don't see that getting addressed at all in this community. I work for a civil engineering company. We try to recruit people out of college. We can't hire anybody. We pay good wages. We've got great benefit, but I don't think people see this as a good community to raise children. People see it's a fun place to go to college, and it's a great place to retire, but it's not a good place to raise a family. And that's a problem for businesses that are trying to grow here, like the business that I work for. And we've got to solve the problem of education in this community. Because in my neighborhood, we see people have little kids, and as soon as their kids get to be ready for elementary school, they move, because they don't think the schools are any good. And I don't see that getting addressed here at all. It seems to be baked in.
I think that dovetails with the topic of the Unified Development Ordinance.
Yeah.
And I'm probably a little naive. I'm not, as a planner, and I'm not an expert on this, but I do see that we have a little bit of land left to make careful decisions about how we develop it. And one thing that we lack is diversity in housing stock, in particular in the better neighborhoods and parts of town. And to the degree that something pops up, you see people come out and protest in droves. Same people complain about the quality of the schools or the fact that there are so few good schools, yet they don't want a diverse segment of the population living in their neighborhood or low-income housing. So I think that's one of the big issues that has to be addressed in unified development, is considering how we make our schools more diverse and across the board better. has a lot to do with where people live and how mixed the communities are.
I'm trying to make sure you can get on your
Yeah,
questions in,
I
so.
know.
It's hard not to want to say something, but I'm just.
Okay, that's
Well,
good.
actually, my question is for this week.
Okay.
It goes, I'm gonna go back high level a little bit, because in your opening, you mentioned that there was that stalling statistic about 67% of the North Carolina innovation being was 3 counties. So my big question was, did you guys discover why? Were the other counties ignored? Was there a why? Was there any?
67% of the innovation economy.
Yes.
Was it
So the innovation follows innovation, right? And what RTP has done, which is really the innovation driver for the triangle, is create an ecosystem of all sorts of startups that are suppliers to the anchor institutions there. In order to have an innovation in the economy elsewhere, and this is something that Charlotte figured out when they tried to get into this game, because forever Charlotte was one of the financial industry's giants, and then banks started to wane and merge and be acquired, and they decided they wanted to be, but they didn't have core anchor institutions, which is required. So one of the things that's exciting to me about what Wilmington is doing is part of what's surprising to me, or maybe it's just dissonance in my head when we talk about economic development versus environmental or natural resources, is saying, we've got this amazing marine sciences asset. Can we build an ecosystem around that creates a startup economy that really begins to drive the innovation economy?
Similar to your SWOT analysis.
Well, it doesn't hurt to have 4 or 5 research institutions in your 2-county, 3-county area.
That helps too.
So we have 3 institutions in at least 2-county area between.
He was talking about the triangle.
Of course. And there's something I want to say about the triangle too. Brunswick County, Newfoundland County. So I'm part of the Innovate, Institute for Emerging Issues, Innovate North Carolina program here in southeastern North Carolina. I'm one of the co-chairs together with Gary Vidmar from Leland. And we have looked at a variety of things, all the things you're talking about. Where would you put a thing if it developed? How would you build around a crystal of marine and life sciences? How would you build the cluster? What would the cluster look like? What kinds of people would you need to hire to fill that cluster? In the university system, and it's not just UNCW, but universities in general, ask their students after their undergraduate degree to go away and make their mark. And if later you come back with an advanced degree, you can come back as a university for the region. But it's actually to get your university out into the global world, basically. So I don't really see UNCW as creating all of these graduates, and then they all stay in town. They end up waiting the tables because there's not enough jobs for them. So it's a chicken and an egg. You have to have the industries before you can have the students hired, and you have to have the students to be hired to have the industries. So it kind of goes hand in hand. Our group over the last 2 years has been developing a strategic plan for the region that is in the biotech and life sciences region. We're looking to expand out into Leland because there is no more space in the Wilmington area to build anything. So what we have down in Myrtle Grove Road and Mason Borough Loop Road, the Crest Research Park, that's as big as it'll get. To the south of us, it's all big houses now. To the north of us, it's going to be a senior living facility. Just started working on that this last week, not us, but people that are building that. Okay, so having said that, then you say, what do you do for the region? How do you make this actually work? What do you use for an economic driver? What do you use for the funding? We went out with a consortium up and down the East Coast and wrote for a large NIST, Federal Department of Commerce grant. $250 million, industry-driven, that's going to work with universities. In North Carolina, NC State and UNCW are the 2 Tier 1 partners. Okay, a not bad company. If you look at NC State, though, and you look around Durham County, that's no great shakes for what's happening there either. They're not hiring all the people that are in their region. What's wrong there? It's the same kind of thing. STEM education. You don't have education at the elementary school level. The kids can't cipher at that level. They can't read. If they can't read, they get passed on to their junior high school or middle school now. They still can't handle the STEM curriculum. You get into college, if you can get into college, you have to have STEM skills to get into college. So this has to go all the way back to elementary and middle school levels. It's not just, you know, us at the top trying to bring everybody up to the same level. It's trying to work together with those students. When IEI first called the sister cities all together that were the winners of the competition, we're not so sure we're winners now. It's like, holy cow. So actually conversing with them, diversity is a big deal. How do you become totally inclusive and bring people in that not have the abilities, not have the capabilities to have the abilities? How do you bring those people into an innovation economy? And that's the tough part. We've gotten through the strategic plan. We know what we want to do. Our time with them, we're almost graduating with them. What do we do now? It's that same thing when you graduate college. What are you going to do? We're not quite sure where we're going to go. But we do know that we need the state and the community to be behind us in what we're doing, as well as other economic developers around the region. How do you get all together to do that? And that's our current dilemma.
I'd like to say something going back to the two North Carolinas, the rural versus, I mean, it's a national phenomenon, right? If you look at the electoral mass.
We don't have a patent on that problem.
In the United States, we send people abroad like Vista Peace Corps, or actually Vista's national. But we need to do something about education in the rural areas. We need to recruit people to go in and teach STEM in the critical thinking and analytical skills. There are people in this country that have the foggiest idea how to think the way of a paper bag. And that's hurting us everywhere. That's why we're in the situation we are in. People can't make intelligent decisions about anything, and especially who to vote for. If you don't know how to analyze facts, not alternative facts, and you know, and put things together and think about things and like, well, that's a piece of junk that they're trying to sell me here. But you know, we can't, and those same people need those skills to install solar panels or to develop the kind of industries. There is an economy in this country in renewable energy. China is beating the pants off of us in doing that. And we talk about it, all we want to do is drill, baby, drill, instead of embracing the future of energy. I mean, we cannot live without energy. It's as fundamental to us as water. And we're not doing very much to really tap all of the resources that we can. And there's a lot of jobs in that. You can't automate all of that. That's real people with hands and brains doing stuff. And education.
Sure, I was going to say, there's a near-term, but also a long-term strategy to have. And it starts with preschool on one end of that continuum.
Bruce, you've been
I
trying
was just going to ask, for all those in this room who are over the age of 60, I'm not just looking at you and me, Jim, but you remember how the Research Triangle Park came to be in the first place, and how that was motivated, political will behind it, the financial, private industry, the true public-private partnership model was an extraordinary. Charlotte tried to copy that. They tried to recreate that same thing. They put as much money, they threw as much money as they could against it, and it's struggling and probably will not make it. But the RTP as it exists today is a model for recreating a nucleus that would attract an IBM, a Nortel, a Glaxo, a Burroughs Wellcome. Those industries knew nothing about those wide open cow pastures. They had no idea. So in 1957, a bunch of legislators and private business people recruited those people to come. And there was no incentive other than the access to the land and very favorable land and purchase rates.
Right.
Is there even the remotest will to in this current political environment to try to capitalize on what is a proven model, but that requires a collective, I have to add, I guess, a nonpartisan effort to recreate that kind of infrastructure, that emotional commitment to the state, to a specific area. And by the way, the RTP clearly benefited everybody in the state. There's no question. Our innovative growth would not have occurred without the existence of an RTP.
Well, so I don't need to tell you how fortunate RTP is to have these research units. And you know also very well, Charlotte set out to replicate that. And they realized at some point they needed a major research unit. And so that's a slow pull to replicate the kind of research university situation we've just been trying. And if anybody can do it, Charlotte can do it. They sure have.
Is there the political will to do it in Raleigh, let alone in any of our major urban centers? But is there, and by the way, most of our conversation today has really been about urban solutions.
Sure.
I've heard no rural solutions other than maybe the suggestion that we can now grow hemp, which would be an unbelievable asset to this, and let alone marijuana, which would completely change a good idea for the state.
Yeah. Well, again, this is simplistic answer. When you think about the fact that you've got North Carolina, as well as NC Central, Duke, and the University of North Carolina, through, I guess, accidents of history or whatever,
Timing.
yeah, that's a hard thing to replicate. It's not cool.
So should we try to even replicate, is it even a model you create, an innovation center, or even the idea of an innovation economy based in a rural and or peri-urban setting? Is that realistic?
I want to hear, Anita, I feel like you have thoughts on the political will and.
I actually think the challenge to doing an RTP in Raleigh, the challenge is across the state of North Carolina. So when you look at the private contributions to RTP, most of the private money raised came from Winston-Salem.
That's correct.
The idea that today Wilmington would put up most of the money for something that's happening in Greensboro, it's just not going to happen. The state is too big, people are too disconnected, the kind of personal relationships that you needed to have in order for people to think this one thing in this one place is going to be beneficial to the entire state. I just think it's not reasonable. We're sitting here talking about the challenges to regionalism, to how do you convince people in Wilmington that something in Leland is going to be in their best interest and they should invest in it. I don't think we live in that state anymore. But the RTP model, which itself is changing, you know, I was saying to the RTP Foundation recently, I was in Barcelona at their big District 22 Innovation District, and I was talking about being from RTP. And every person in the room who was 60 or older said, oh my God. And all the people who were 40 and younger said, what is RTP? So that model in and of itself is now somewhat aged. And what you see Winston-Salem doing with its innovation quarter and its connection to Baptist Hospital, what you see happening in Greensboro, that's the innovation, the RTP Innovation Center of the future.
And I take it that is working.
Yeah.
I'd say it's interesting that, you know, RTP, what sparked it in the initial? I mean, did they hit rock bottom in that area, or did they see the end and needed to do that? And if you look at Wilmington with building, you know, construction and everything, I mean, our economy here is booming, not in the way that we particularly want it, but it is. So it causes most of the population not to look in that direction or invest all that big money in that direction when it's working fine here for now, making a lot of money on that.
Yeah, it wasn't that it hit rock bottom, it was that the state's leaders, recognizing that back then there were like 10 of them, right?
Yeah, right. They really wanted to keep the university students.
Right. They wanted their children to have somewhere they could work in North Carolina, and they were tired of the brightest North Carolina students always having to head to the Northeast. That was the vision.
But the leap of faith for an IBM to move here, or Blackstone, or Morcell, and for that initiative to occur without incentives, other than the access to the land.
Without I-40.
Without I-40, yeah. I mean, it was a budding industry, the computer world, pharmaceuticals, those were things that were new in their infancy and really hadn't caught hold yet. Are we even looking at the next best thing to take us both from a rural and an urban perspective into the next gen, to create the next RTP type initiative, to collect those kinds of people who might see us, regardless of HB2, as a great opportunity, given the quality of the people. The 70% that live above the poverty line, and in Wilmington, it's an unbelievable number. And whoever brought up the idea about the fact that our poverty is so intense, it is worse than any of us know. And raising the prices isn't going to do it. Closing the door behind us, looking for the last one in, is not going to do it. There's got to be a better way. And the environmental justice issue that we talked about, Harper, I can tell you this right now. Look at someone who doesn't have a job and can't feed his family, and title becomes the best thing that ever happened to them. And to say, no, we can't have it for the following reasons, they look at you with a blank stare. And that's 30% of our population in those regions. I mean, it is a radical problem.
And on Bruce's notes that there must be a better way, and that are we even thinking about the next RTP opportunity, although probably not that. I think that is the challenge, and I think that's the challenge. That's part of why we began working on the roadmap project, to put together and source ideas, not just from across North Carolina, but again from other states who are doing some things well, and to look at the research, and to have these conversations, to learn about what's going on in your areas, and hear what ideas and what concerns you all have. So on that note, I think it is all of our challenges to figure out the answer to that question, and to work together. I want to thank you all again. Thank the Cape Fear Economic Development Council for having this panel discussion, and thank our amazing panelists for sharing really some great perspective. We hope to be with you all again. I want to thank North Carolina First as well for sponsoring this project and allowing us to all be here as well. So thank you all so much. Have a great night. Please stay connected with us. There's information about how to connect with us online and phone and email. So please stay connected with Roadmap. Talk about Roadmap to your elected officials, and let's keep working together.
Sarah,
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Is anything you need to do? I'm dropping so much here real quick. If there's anything you can do to influence getting rid of HB2, that's the single thing that can help our state in the near term.